During exercise, your heart works hard to pump the extra blood with the oxygen and nutrients that your muscles need. This blood flow is measured in liters per minute and is called cardiac output, which relies on increases in heart rate and stroke volume to meet the blood flow demands of the muscle. It's important that the cardiac output matches the needs of the muscles. If it's too low, the muscles will fatigue. Too high wastes energy and effort of the cardiovascular system. So what controls the increase in heart rate and stroke volume and therefore cardiac output to the appropriate level? With muscle contraction, the length and pressure inside the muscle changes, metabolites are released from the muscle into the blood, and blood pressure rises. These changes trigger receptors that send impulses to the medulla, the cardiovascular control center of the brain. For example, baroreceptor sends changes in blood pressure. Under resting conditions, when blood pressure goes up, the baroreceptors signal the medulla to lower heart rate, which reduces cardiac output and returns blood pressure to its normal level. But during exercise, the sensitivity of the baroreceptors resets, allowing blood pressure to increase without decreasing heart rate. This is necessary because a higher blood pressure is needed to push all that extra blood flow through the circulatory system. There are also mechano and chemoreceptors that sense physical and chemical changes in and around the muscles. When activated, they also send impulses to the medulla. And based on the degree of impulses received, the medulla will reduce parasympathetic stimulation, which increases heart rate from its resting level to about 100 beats per minute. It will also increase sympathetic stimulation, which increases heart rate beyond 100 beats per minute. During light exercise, the changes in and around the muscle are relatively small, so the receptors are only mildly activated, resulting in a small increase in heart rate. With moderate exercise, the changes are a little greater, the receptors are more strongly activated, and heart rate is increased to a higher level. And the trend continues with intense exercise until a maximal effort by the muscles pushes heart rate to its maximal rate. In other words, the intensity of muscle activity during exercise is directly tied to how much heart rate will increase, which helps assure that the heart doesn't have to work any harder than needed, but that the muscles get the blood flow they demand. Side note, 220 minus age isn't the most accurate formula to predict maximal heart rate. Stroke volume is the second variable that influences cardiac output. It's the amount of blood pumped by the heart with each beat. The same sympathetic nervous system that increases how fast the heart beats also increases the force of its contraction. The harder the contraction, the more blood gets pumped out as the stroke volume. But the heart can't pump more blood than it receives. So one mechanism that helps increase stroke volume during exercise is increasing the amount of blood coming into the heart. The veins that carry blood flow back to the heart are large and lined with smooth muscle. That, under sympathetic stimulation, squeezes down on the veins and, like a tube of toothpaste, pushes more blood into the heart. Two other factors are the muscle and respiratory pumps. Your muscles can act as a pump as they widen and narrow during contraction. As they narrow, veins open up and blood flows into the surrounding veins. Then as they widen, they push against the veins, moving the blood further along. The repeated nature of muscle contraction during exercise then milks or pumps more blood back to the heart. This is referred to as the muscle pump. The respiratory pump is due to changes in your chest wall as you breathe in and out, which also milks or pumps blood back to the heart. All this extra blood flowing into the heart stretches the chambers of the heart, and like an elastic band, stretched myocardium or heart muscle recoils or contracts with greater force, helping to increase stroke volume. The amount of blood coming into the heart and the degree of stretch it places on its chambers is referred to as the preload. The stretching of the heart walls along with sympathetic stimulation allow the heart to contract with a little more force, pumping out all the extra blood it received, and thus increases stroke volume. But wait, there's more. On the other side of the heart, vasodilation of the blood vessels that receive pump blood reduces the resistance the heart has to pump against. This makes it easier for the heart to pump more blood per beat, thus helping to increase stroke volume. This vasodilation occurs in part due to metabolites released by exercising muscles into the surrounding blood vessels. Like heart rate, the factors that increase stroke volume during exercise are directly tied to the intensity of the muscle contraction. However, the degree of increase in stroke volume is limited by the size of the heart. Once the heart is fully stretched and is filled with as much blood as possible, the amount of blood it pumps out can't increase any further. In other words, the heart can't pump out more blood than it receives. So any further increases in cardiac output with an increase in intensity would have to come from an increase in heart rate. Side note, aerobic training strengthens and enlarges the heart, meaning stroke volume will be greater during exercise in trained individuals. This is one of the major changes responsible for improvements in aerobic performance and VO2 max. Now that we've covered the mechanisms responsible for increasing heart rate and stroke volume and therefore cardiac output during exercise, we need to talk about how the higher cardiac output or blood flow is redirected to the muscles that need it the most. As blood is pumped out of the heart, it first enters the large arteries, and then the smaller arteries and arterioles, which have unique bands of smooth muscle wrapped around them called sphincters. The sphincters can dilate, allowing more blood flow through the arterioles and on into the capillaries, or they can constrict, reducing blood flow. For example, in order for exercising muscles to receive the blood flow they need, some blood flow has to be diverted away from non-exercising muscles and organs. This occurs when sympathetic stimulation constricts the sphincters, reducing blood flow to those areas. However, as exercising muscles release various factors into the bloodstream, like nitric oxide, prostaglandins, and adenosine, the nearby sphincters dilate or relax, bringing more blood flow to those muscles. For example, while riding a bike, blood flow to the less active shoulder muscles will be reduced, while blood flow to the exercising leg muscles will increase. The harder the leg muscles pedal or work, the more metabolites are released, the more vasodilation occurs, and the more blood they receive. The simultaneously occurring vasoconstriction and vasodilation help keep diastolic blood pressure relatively unchanged during exercise. Diastolic blood pressure is the lower pressure, and it's recorded in the arteries as the heart is relaxed or filling with blood. However, the higher cardiac output during exercise increases the systolic or higher blood pressure. This is the pressure in the arteries as the heart contracts. There are also changes to the blood itself. Even though the amount of oxygen put into the blood at the lungs doesn't change, more oxygen is extracted from the blood as it flows past the exercising muscles. This amount of extracted oxygen is called the AVO2 difference, which gets its name from the difference in the amount of oxygen found in the arteries compared to the veins. AVO2 difference increases during exercise because the increase in aerobic energy production inside the muscles lowers its oxygen levels. This increases the concentration difference in oxygen from the capillaries to the muscle fibers. That means more oxygen will flow from the capillaries into the muscle fibers, leaving less oxygen in the blood as it flows into the veins and then onto the lungs where normal levels of oxygen are restored. The plasma or watery portion of the blood may also decrease during exercise, particularly during times of heavy sweating, because the water and sweat is ultimately pulled from the blood. A decrease in plasma volume and therefore blood volume makes it more challenging for the cardiovascular system to supply the exercising muscles with the blood they need. This, along with body temperature regulation, is one reason why it's vital to remain hydrated during exercise. So, while heart rate gets most of the attention, supplying the necessary blood flow to exercising muscles requires a synchronized effort among heart rate, stroke volume, blood pressure, and blood flow, all based on input received by and output given from the medulla oblongata. That's just fun to say. As always, my answers come from peer-reviewed research.